Hi, I'm 35M and I've been married to my wife, Olivia 34F, for 8 years. We met through mutual friends at a party, and it was one of those instant connections. We dated for a couple of years before tying the knot, and for the most part, we've had a good marriage. But looking back, I now see that the real problems began long before we even got married. The issues I'm dealing with now trace back to her parents, Nancy and Peter. Nancy and Peter have always been a bit intense. They're the type of parents who want to know everything happening in their children's lives, and they're very opinionated. At first, I just thought they were protective, especially since Olivia is their youngest daughter. They didn't seem thrilled when Olivia and I first got together. I wasn't good enough in their eyes. I didn't have a high-paying, corporate job. I work in a creative field, which I love, but Nancy made it clear she thought it wasn't stable enough for someone providing for their daughter. When we started planning our wedding, the red flags really began to show. Nancy was incredibly controlling. She had opinions on everything, from the guest list to the venue, the flowers, the food, you name it. If we suggested something, she would immediately shoot it down and suggest an alternative. She even tried to switch our wedding venue last minute to a place she liked better. It was exhausting, but I brushed it off as her just being an excited mother-in-law who wanted to be involved. After we got married, Nancy and Peter decided to gift us a large sum of money for a down payment on our house. At the time, it felt like a generous gesture, but it quickly became apparent that it came with strings attached. They didn't give us this money out of the goodness of their hearts. It was a way to insert themselves into our financial decisions. They wanted to have a say in everything, from which house we should buy to how we should decorate it. It felt like every decision we made had to be run by them first. I started noticing that Olivia would change her mind about things after speaking with her parents. It was small stuff at first, like suddenly deciding we should visit her parents instead of going on a weekend trip we had planned. I overheard a few of these phone calls, and it was always the same, her mother talking in this sweet, guilt-inducing tone, and Olivia agreeing to things we hadn't discussed. It was frustrating, but whenever I brought it up, Olivia would get defensive. She said it was normal for her to be close with her family, and I didn't want to be the husband who tried to come between that. Then there were the gifts. Nancy's gifts were always a bit off. For example, one year on our anniversary, she gave us a framed photo of Olivia with her ex-boyfriend. Nancy laughed it off, saying it was a joke and that she thought it was a funny memory, but it left a bad taste in my mouth. It felt like a deliberate dig, a reminder that she preferred Olivia's ex over me. Olivia didn't seem bothered by it, though, and just brushed it off as her mom's weird sense of humor. It didn't stop there. Every time we planned a vacation, something would come up with Nancy and Peter. We had to cancel trips multiple times because suddenly they needed Olivia for something urgent. Once, we were all set to leave for a romantic anniversary getaway when Nancy called, claiming she had a medical emergency. We rushed over, only to find out it was a false alarm. Olivia didn't seem to notice the pattern, but I started to feel like these emergencies were just a way to keep us from spending time together without them. Nancy's comments were often subtle but cutting. She would make passive-aggressive remarks about my cooking, hinting that Olivia must miss the gourmet meals her ex used to make. If I fixed something around the house, she'd comment that we should have hired a professional. She frequently compared me to Olivia's brother-in-law, who works a high-paying corporate job. Nancy would go on about how he takes care of his family, as if to imply that I wasn't doing enough. Over time, I noticed that Olivia started echoing her mother's criticisms. She became more and more critical of my decisions, questioning me in ways she never had before. It felt like Nancy was planting seeds of doubt in her mind, and they were starting to take root. I tried setting boundaries, telling Nancy and Peter they needed to give us space. But every time I brought it up, Olivia would say I was being harsh, and that her parents just wanted to be involved. The uninvited visits were another issue. Nancy and Peter would show up at our house without warning, often when I wasn't home. I'd come back to find them sitting in our living room, talking to Olivia about things I hadn't been included in. It was as if they were trying to cut me out of the family discussions entirely. Things took a darker turn when I overheard Nancy talking at a family gathering. She didn't know I was within earshot when she said, "We'll get rid of him soon enough." It was a chilling moment that made me realize this wasn't just typical meddling, it was deliberate sabotage. I decided right then that I needed to look deeper into what was going on, and that's when I started to uncover the full extent of their interference. The situation with Nancy and Peter has been building up for years, and I can't believe I've ignored it for so long. Now, I'm starting to piece it all together, and what I'm finding is more manipulative and damaging than I ever imagined. This is only the beginning, and I've got a feeling things are about to get a lot worse. Update 1. After overhearing Nancy's chilling comment at the family gathering about getting rid of me, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I decided to take a closer look at our finances, which up until this point, I had trusted completely. We had a joint account for household expenses and savings, and while I handled most of the bills, I never questioned Olivia's access. I thought we were a team. Turns out, I was wrong. I started by reviewing the last year of bank statements. At first, everything seemed normal: grocery bills, utility payments, and some usual splurges. But then, I noticed several unusual transfers. They were always the same amount, withdrawn at odd times, and marked with vague descriptions like gift or miscellaneous. When I asked Olivia about them, she couldn't give me a straight answer. She shrugged it off, saying they were probably small gifts for family or things she forgot about. But these weren't small amounts. We're talking hundreds, sometimes close to $1,000 at a time. It didn't add up. I dug deeper, pulling up statements from our online banking account late one night when Olivia was asleep. That's when I found it, a separate savings account linked to our joint account, one I didn't even know existed. I confronted Olivia about it the next morning. She looked surprised but quickly turned defensive. She claimed her parents had helped her set it up just in case. When I asked in case of what, she avoided eye contact. I pressed on, asking why I wasn't told about this account and why there had been consistent transfers into it. That's when she dropped the bombshell. Nancy and Peter had suggested it when they gave us the down payment for the house. They told her it was an emergency fund, something to fall back on if our marriage ever hit a rough patch. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It was like they had planned for our marriage to fail from the start. I suggested we see a couples therapist to talk this through because it felt like a massive betrayal. But Olivia refused, insisting her parents only wanted to help and that I was blowing things out of proportion. I knew we weren't going to get anywhere arguing, so I dropped it for the moment. The next day, I decided to get a second opinion. I reached out to a few close friends and a family friend I trust. Every single one of them had the same reaction. They were concerned and agreed that Nancy and Peter's behavior was more than just overbearing, it was controlling. One friend even mentioned that her own mother-in-law had done something similar, and it had ended up destroying her marriage. It was validating to hear, but it also made me realize how deep the manipulation might go. I noticed a disturbing pattern after that. Every time I brought up the issue with Olivia, she would initially seem open to discussing it. But then, almost like clockwork, she'd get a phone call from her mom. After the call, she would completely change her stance, becoming defensive and dismissive. It was like Nancy had some sort of hold over her, and I couldn't figure out why Olivia couldn't see it. A few days later, Nancy sent me an email out of the blue. It was long and detailed, outlining a budget plan she thought we should follow. It was filled with suggestions about cutting back on our spending, reallocating funds, and even suggested I take on a second job to bring in extra income. It didn't align at all with the financial goals Olivia and I had discussed, and it was clear Nancy had no problem overstepping boundaries and involving herself in our marriage like she was a third partner. I decided to dig deeper into when this separate savings account was set up. After checking the dates, I realized it was open right after we got the down payment for the house from Nancy and Peter. It was obvious now they had orchestrated this from the beginning, using their gift as a way to control our finances. I couldn't help but feel like they were trying to keep me financially vulnerable, or at least set up a safety net for Olivia to leave me if things didn't go the way they wanted. One day at work, a coworker and I got to talking during lunch. I mentioned some of the issues I was dealing with without giving too many details, and he shared a similar story. His in-laws had tried to control their finances too, setting up accounts and making decisions without his knowledge. It felt like a small piece of validation. I wasn't crazy, and this kind of manipulation did happen. When I brought this up to Olivia again, she brushed it off, saying it was normal for parents to help out this way. She couldn't understand why I was so upset, and it turned into a heated argument. I pointed out the emails, the hidden account, and the fact that Nancy had been controlling our decisions without me even knowing. Olivia's response? She accused me of trying to control her and said I was being paranoid. At that point, I started researching what legal options I might have if this continued. Could I protect our joint finances? What steps could I take to make sure this kind of manipulation stopped? The more I read, the more I realized how vulnerable I had been. The fight escalated when Olivia gave me an ultimatum: drop the issue or risk breaking our relationship. It felt like a punch to the gut. I was trying to protect our marriage, and she was siding with her parents. Feeling isolated and desperate, I turned to Reddit. I posted everything that had been happening, hoping for advice or at least some outside perspective. Within hours, the post blew up. There were hundreds of comments from people who had dealt with toxic in-laws and shared their own stories. The overwhelming consensus was clear. This wasn't normal, and I needed to protect myself. For the first time, I felt like I wasn't alone in this, but I also knew that things were only going to get more complicated from here. This was just the beginning. Update 2. After reading all the supportive comments on my Reddit post, I felt more determined to get to the bot Peter of what Nancy had been up to. The overwhelming advice was to dig deeper into our past and look for more signs of her interference. I took that advice to heart and started going through old emails, texts, and records. I had a sinking feeling there was much more I hadn't noticed. The first thing I found was a string of old emails between Olivia and Nancy dating back years, long before I suspected any of this. There were emails from Nancy advising Olivia on our finances, even suggesting she transfer money into the separate savings account for safekeeping. Nancy framed it as a way to protect Olivia just in case. It was clear now that she was planting seeds of doubt about our marriage right from the beginning. As I continued digging, I came across a text exchange between Olivia and her mother that caught me off guard. It was from a few years ago when I had been offered a great job opportunity in another city. I had turned it down at the time, thinking it wasn't the right move for us. Now I realized why. Nancy had convinced Olivia to pressure me into declining the offer. In the texts, Nancy told Olivia that moving would be too risky and that I wasn't thinking about the family. She had manipulated the entire situation without me even knowing. Next, I looked at our vacation plans. Olivia and I had planned a big anniversary trip a couple of years ago, something we'd both been excited about for months. At the last minute, we had to cancel because Nancy suddenly claimed she had a health scare. We rushed over to be with her, but when we got there, she was completely fine, sitting on the couch, watching TV like nothing had happened. I had brushed it off back then as a lucky recovery, but now it was clear. She had faked the whole thing to keep us from going on the trip. Feeling frustrated, I brought all this up with Olivia. I expected her to be shocked, but instead, she got defensive. She said her mother had already apologized for some of these things and that I needed to let it go. But the apology was half-hearted at best. a brief email where Nancy claimed she might have overstepped, but only because she cared so much. It wasn't an apology, it was just another way to avoid taking responsibility. I was starting to see a pattern. Every time I pointed out something Nancy had done, Olivia would crumble. She'd say she felt caught in the middle, like she was being forced to choose between her husband and her parents. It was hard to watch, but it was becoming clearer that Nancy had been manipulating her for years, using guilt and emotional blackmail to control her decisions. Around this time, a close friend of mine reached out. He had seen my post on Reddit and wanted to talk. He told me he had always felt like Nancy's behavior was borderline emotional abuse, but he didn't want to say anything and risk upsetting me. He shared stories of his own experiences with controlling in-laws, and it helped me see that I wasn't overreacting. This wasn't normal, and I wasn't imagining it. With this new perspective, I confronted Olivia again. This time, I showed her the emails and texts I had found. I laid it all out, explaining how her mother had been interfering in our marriage from the start. Under the pressure of the evidence, Olivia finally broke down. She admitted that she had been confiding in her mother about all of our marital problems, every little fight, every disagreement. Nancy had used that information against us, twisting it to make me look like the bad guy. As we talked, more financial discrepancies came to light. Olivia admitted that she had made several large purchases and transfers without telling me because her mother had advised her to. Nancy had convinced her that it was for the best, that she needed to have a safety net in case our marriage didn't work out. It was like Nancy had been preparing for our relationship to fail from the start, and Olivia had unknowingly played along. I told Olivia that we needed to set some serious boundaries with her parents if our marriage was going to survive this. I suggested we go low contact, limiting how often we saw them and what we shared with them. Olivia hesitated, clearly worried about how her parents would react. She didn't want to cut them off, even temporarily, but I insisted. It wasn't a suggestion anymore, it was a necessity. The very next day, Nancy showed up at our house uninvited. She demanded to speak with Olivia alone. I was in the other room, but I could hear everything. Nancy's voice was calm, but the words she used were sharp. She told Olivia that I was tearing the family apart and that she needed to choose between her marriage and her family. It was a direct attempt to turn Olivia against me, and it almost worked. Later that week, we finally attended a therapy session. I had pushed for it for months, and Olivia finally agreed. The therapist listened to everything, the hidden account, the interference, the manipulation. She didn't hold back. She told us plainly that Nancy's behavior was highly manipulative and unhealthy. The session was eye-opening, and for the first time I saw a shift in Olivia. She seemed to realize just how toxic her mother's influence had been. After the session, I gave Olivia an ultimatum. We either set firm boundaries with her parents, or we take a break. I couldn't keep living like this, constantly undermined and manipulated. It was the hardest conversation we'd ever had, but it felt necessary. When I updated Reddit, the response was overwhelming. The post went viral, with thousands of comments from people who had dealt with similar situations. The support was incredible, but the stories people shared were heartbreaking. It made me realize just how common this kind of manipulation was and how many people were trapped in similar toxic family dynamics. We weren't out of the woods yet, but at least now, the truth was out in the open. It was time to see what Olivia would do next. Would she stand up to her parents, or would their control continue to rule our marriage? I guess only time would tell. Update 3. After our therapist strongly recommended setting boundaries, Olivia finally agreed to go no contact with her parents, at least for a while. She sent a simple text to Nancy and Peter, explaining that we needed space and wouldn't be in touch for some time. We hoped this would give us a chance to focus on our marriage without interference. What we didn't anticipate was just how quickly things would escalate. Within an hour of sending the message, Nancy bombarded Olivia's phone with calls and texts. The messages ranged from guilt-tripping, "How could you do this to your own mother?" to outright accusations, calling me controlling and abusive. It was a non-stop barrage, and when Olivia didn't respond, Nancy decided to show up at our house. I heard the pounding on our front door before I even realized what was happening. It was Nancy, shouting that she needed to talk to Olivia. I told her to leave, but she refused, insisting that I was keeping her daughter away. I had no choice but to call the police. When the officers arrived, Nancy immediately started crying, painting herself as the victim. She claimed she was just a worried mother, but thankfully the officers could see through her act and asked her to leave. It was embarrassing and stressful, but at least she was gone, for now. Over the next few days, I could see the toll it was taking on Olivia. Nancy's manipulation was working. She began second-guessing our decision to go no contact. She felt guilty, saying she never wanted to hurt her mother. It was like Nancy knew exactly which buttons to push to make Olivia doubt herself. The next thing I knew, Nancy had taken her campaign online. She started posting vague but pointed messages on Facebook, things like, "It's heartbreaking when someone you thought was family turns out to be the enemy, and some people will isolate you from your loved ones just to control you." The posts didn't mention us by name, but it was obvious who she was talking about. It wasn't long before extended family members started reaching out to Olivia, asking if she was okay and if she needed help. Nancy had successfully convinced them that I was the problem, that I was the one manipulating Olivia. Feeling overwhelmed, we decided to take a break from social media and focus on ourselves. One afternoon, while I was cleaning out the storage room, I found an old, dusty box that I didn't recognize. Inside, there were various items from Olivia's childhood, including a stack of old journals. I was about to put them aside when something caught my eye, a journal labeled plans in Nancy's familiar handwriting. Curious, I flipped through it. What I found inside was disturbing. The entries went back years, even before Olivia and I got married. Nancy had written detailed notes about conversations she'd had with Olivia, filled with manipulative language. She had made lists of ways to guide Olivia's decisions and entries about moments she had deliberately tried to plant seeds of doubt in Olivia's mind about me. One entry stood out: Olivia seems happy now, but she'll realize eventually that he's not good enough for her. I just need to keep reminding her. I showed the journal to Olivia. She read a few pages before breaking down. It was like a veil had been lifted. For the first time, she could see just how deeply her mother had been manipulating her. She cried for what felt like hours, not just out of sadness, but out of anger too. It was the first time I had seen her direct her anger towards her mother instead of at me or herself. We took the journal to our next therapy session. The therapist didn't hold back. She pointed out the toxic behavior and labeled it as emotional abuse. The therapist explained that what Nancy had been doing wasn't just meddling, it was a calculated attempt to control Olivia's life, even at the cost of our marriage. Hearing it put so bluntly seemed to give Olivia some clarity. Not long after, Nancy sent a letter to our house. It was several pages long, filled with pleas for Olivia to come back to the family. Nancy accused me of brainwashing her, insisting that I was the one isolating her. It was classic manipulation, designed to pull at Olivia's heartstrings and make her question everything. But this time, Olivia wasn't falling for it. Around this time, Olivia's estranged sister, Laura, reached out. Laura hadn't spoken to Nancy in years after a falling out over a similar issue. She had seen some of the Facebook posts and wanted to check in. Laura shared her own stories of Nancy's manipulation, detailing how she had tried to control her marriage too. It was like listening to a mirror image of what we were going through. Laura's support helped validate what we had been feeling and gave Olivia the strength to continue with no contact. For the first time, Olivia's anger wasn't directed at me. She was furious with her mother for the years of control, the lies, and the manipulation. It was like a switch had flipped. She wanted to take action, so we decided to consult a lawyer. We needed to know what our options were if Nancy's harassment continued, especially given her behavior at our house and the smear campaign online. The lawyer listened to everything: the texts, the social media posts, the uninvited visits. He advised us that we had enough evidence to pursue a restraining order if Nancy didn't back off. He also suggested documenting everything going forward, just in case we needed to take further legal action. I turned to Reddit once again, updating everyone on the latest developments. The response was incredible. The post blew up, with thousands of upvotes and hundreds of comments from people who had dealt with similar toxic family dynamics. It was heartbreaking to see how common this was, but it was also comforting to know we weren't alone. The situation was still far from over, but at least now we had a plan. We were ready to stand up to Nancy and take back control of our lives. The question was, how far would she go to try and regain her grip on Olivia? I had a feeling we were about to find out. Update 4. After discovering Nancy's journal, we knew we needed to take serious action. Her behavior was escalating, and it was becoming clear she wasn't going to back down easily. We decided to file for a restraining order. The constant uninvited visits, the harassing messages, it was all too much. Olivia was hesitant at first, torn between protecting our marriage and her loyalty to her parents. It was a tough call, but I reminded her that this was about setting boundaries and finally standing up for ourselves. We met with our lawyer and explained everything: the manipulation, the harassment, the uninvited visits, and the emotional abuse detailed in the journal. The lawyer helped us file the necessary paperwork, and we waited anxiously for the hearing. In the meantime, Nancy's behavior took an even darker turn. A few days after we filed, we ran into Nancy at a local grocery store. I didn't see her at first, but she spotted us and marched over, fuming. Without any warning, she started shouting, accusing me of brainwashing Olivia and keeping her away from her family. People around us stopped and stared as Nancy's voice grew louder. She was pointing her finger, tears streaming down her face, making a scene right in the middle of the store. Olivia stood there, frozen, while I tried to calmly defuse the situation. It was humiliating, and the looks from the other shoppers made it even worse. Eventually, the store manager came over and escorted Nancy out. It was one of the most public meltdowns I'd ever witnessed, and it felt like a desperate last attempt to control the narrative. After the grocery store incident, Olivia's sister Laura reached out again. She had seen Nancy's Facebook posts and heard about the public meltdown. Laura became an even stronger ally, sharing more about how Nancy had tried to manipulate her own marriage years ago. It helped Olivia realize that she wasn't alone in this, and that her mother's behavior was a pattern, not a one-time thing. Not long after, Nancy pulled another stunt. Out of nowhere, she sent Olivia a message claiming she was seriously ill. The timing was suspicious, coming right after we filed for the restraining order. Nancy said she had been diagnosed with a rare condition and needed Olivia by her side. I could see the conflict in Olivia's eyes, the way she started doubting our decision to go no contact. But Laura stepped in and confirmed what I suspected: it was another manipulation tactic. Nancy wasn't sick, she was using the lie to try and reel Olivia back in. The betrayal hit Olivia hard, and for the first time, she seemed genuinely done with her mother's games. We took this new development to our therapist. During the session, Olivia admitted she had been afraid of losing her parents' approval her entire life. The therapist pointed out how Nancy had weaponized that fear against her, using guilt and manipulation to keep her under control. It was a breakthrough moment. Olivia realized that her mother's approval was something she could never truly earn, no matter what she did. It was a painful realization, but it gave her a sense of clarity she hadn't had before. Just when we thought things couldn't get worse, Nancy took her manipulation to the next level. She enlisted extended family members to send Olivia guilt-laden letters, begging her to come back to the family. The letters were filled with phrases like "family is everything," and "we just want you back with us." It was obvious they had been coached by Nancy, and it only made Olivia feel more isolated. It was like Nancy was rallying the entire family against us, painting me as the villain who had torn her daughter away. Then, out of nowhere, we got a visit from the police. Nancy had filed a false police report, claiming I was abusive. Thankfully, we had plenty of evidence to disprove her claims: the journal entries, the messages, the witnesses who had seen her behavior. The police didn't take her accusations seriously, but the incident was still terrifying. It was a new low, even for Nancy, and it left us both feeling shaken. Surprisingly, our friends and neighbors rallied around us. They had seen Nancy's erratic behavior over the years and weren't fooled by her smear campaign. Several of them even offered to provide statements if we needed them for the restraining order hearing. It was a small but much-needed sign of support during a time when we felt completely alone. The final straw came at a family gathering that Laura had invited us to. We were hesitant to go, knowing there was a chance Nancy might show up, but Laura insisted it would be a safe space, and we decided to take the risk. Sure enough, Nancy arrived uninvited, storming in with tears and accusations. She shouted at me, blaming me for tearing the family apart. It was chaos, and for a moment, I thought we might have to call the police again. But then something surprising happened. Peter, who had always stayed silent and let Nancy take the lead, finally spoke up. He admitted, in front of everyone, that he had enabled Nancy's behavior for years. He said he was tired of the manipulation and the lies. It was a shocking moment. Peter had never once stood up to Nancy, and seeing him finally admit the truth was like watching a crack form in her armor. The next day, we went to court for the restraining order hearing. We presented everything: the journal entries, the false police report, the messages and statements from our friends and neighbors. The judge didn't hesitate. The restraining order was granted, and for the first time in a long while, we felt a sense of relief. I shared an update on Reddit after the hearing. The post went viral almost immediately. People flooded the comments with stories of their own toxic in-laws, offering support and encouragement. It was overwhelming, but it also made me realize just how many people go through similar situations. With the restraining order in place, we finally had a small window of peace. It wasn't the end of the battle, but it felt like we had taken a huge step forward. We had stood up to Nancy, and for the first time, it felt like we were on the path to reclaiming our lives. Update 5. With the restraining order in place, we hoped things would finally calm down. But it didn't take long for Nancy to show us just how far she was willing to go. Barely a month had passed when she showed up at our house, pounding on the door and demanding to see Olivia. We couldn't believe it. Despite the legal order, she was standing on our doorstep, acting like nothing had changed. I called the police immediately. Nancy stood outside, shouting that she just needed 5 minutes to talk to her daughter. It was heartbreaking to watch Olivia standing frozen in the living room, her face a mix of shock and sadness. The police arrived quickly, and Nancy switched gears, crying and pleading with them, saying she just wanted to speak with her daughter. The officers were firm this time. They reminded her of the restraining order and escorted her off the property. It felt like the final straw had been pulled. After the incident, Olivia broke down. It was like something inside her finally shattered. She realized her mother was never going to change. No matter what boundaries we set, Nancy would always find a way to cross them. It was a painful but necessary moment of clarity. For the first time, Olivia fully accepted that going no contact permanently was the only way to protect our marriage and our sanity. Laura, who had become an invaluable support through all of this, came over that evening. She could see how drained we were. Without missing a beat, she started helping us pack. It was her idea that maybe it was time for a complete fresh start. Olivia agreed, and for the first time, the idea of moving away felt like a real possibility. We made the decision right there. We were going to sell our house and move to a new city, far away from Nancy's reach. As we packed up our things, Nancy left one final message on Olivia's voicemail. It was long, tearful, and filled with promises to change. She begged for forgiveness, saying she just wanted her family back. We listened to it together, but neither of us felt compelled to respond. We knew it was just another attempt to reel Olivia back in, and we couldn't risk falling for it again. Before we left, we had one last session with our therapist. It was an emotional session, filled with reflection on how far we'd come. The therapist praised Olivia for her growth, for finally recognizing the toxic hold her mother had on her. It felt like a weight was being lifted. Olivia was starting to see that she wasn't the same person she was a few months ago. She was stronger now, more aware of the patterns that had kept her trapped for so long. One of the most powerful moments came when Olivia decided to write a letter to Nancy. It wasn't meant to be sent. It was purely for her own closure. In the letter, she poured out everything: the hurt, the betrayal, the manipulation she had endured for years. It was cathartic for her, a way to finally express all the emotions she'd bottled up. After she finished, she folded the letter, placed it in a box, and set it aside. It was her way of saying goodbye to that chapter of her life. As we prepared to move, the reactions from family were mixed. Some relatives reached out, supporting our decision and wishing us well. Others, clearly influenced by Nancy's narrative, blamed me for taking Olivia away. It stung, but we were used to it by now. We decided not to engage, focusing instead on our new beginning. I made one final post on Reddit, updating everyone on what had happened. I shared our decision to move and go no contact permanently. The response was overwhelming. The post quickly went viral, with over 20,000 upvotes and thousands of comments. People shared their own stories of going no contact with toxic family members, offering encouragement and support. It felt like a wave of validation, knowing we weren't alone in this struggle. Moving day came, and it was bittersweet. We said goodbye to the house where we had built so many memories, but it also felt like we were leaving behind the weight of Nancy's influence. The drive to our new city was quiet, both of us lost in our own thoughts, but there was a sense of relief in the air, like we were finally free. In our new city, things felt different. We had a fresh start, a clean slate. For the first time in a long time, we were able to focus on each other without the constant shadow of interference. We spent our weekends exploring new places, setting up our new home, and just enjoying the peace. It felt like we were rediscovering each other, rebuilding the trust that had been chipped away over the years. A few months after the move, we received a letter from Peter. It was unexpected, but I opened it cautiously. Peter apologized for his role in everything, admitting that he had enabled Nancy's behavior for years. He said he had stayed silent out of fear of upsetting her, but he now realized how much damage it had caused. We chose not to respond. The apology was appreciated, but it was too little, too late. We couldn't risk letting them back into our lives, even for a moment. In the months that followed, Olivia started expressing a level of peace I hadn't seen in years. She smiled more, laughed more, and seemed genuinely lighter. One evening, as we were watching the sunset from our new balcony, she turned to me and said it was the first time she felt free, free from the constant pressure of her mother's expectations, free to live her own life. For our final step, we decided to block Nancy on every platform. Her last message was left unread. It wasn't an easy decision, but it felt right. It was our way of closing the door for good, of choosing our own path forward. We didn't need her approval anymore. We had each other, and that was enough. Looking back, it's clear that this journey wasn't just about breaking free from Nancy's control. It was about finding ourselves, standing up for our marriage, and learning what real boundaries look like. We may have lost some family along the way, but what we gained was far more valuable: peace, trust, and the freedom to live our lives on our own terms. And for the first time in years, we're genuinely happy.